Hello and welcome to Supervision Smörgåsbord, a podcast full of tips, tricks, and interviews with experts to help you enjoy being a supervisor. Here's your host, Dr. Tara Sanderson.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Today, we're going to be talking with Matthew Verrette. He uses he, him pronouns. Matthew Verrette is a registered social worker, capacity assessor, and master's level psychotherapist operating out of Ontario, Canada. His private practice and previous areas of training and treatment have been in the structured cognitive behavioral therapy protocols for anxiety and depression, with a newer focus on integrating geek therapy, gaming with intent, and therapy-blended tabletop role-playing games. In recent years, he's worked with the Bodhana Group in York, Pennsylvania, providing trainings, research, education, game development, and supervision for integrating therapy into physical games. Thank you so much for being here with us, Matthew.
No problem. We were just geeking out about this, that, and the other, so it's great to be here.
Yeah. Well, as you know, we always ask a random question at the beginning, and today's random question could not have been more fitting. You actually saw me pull it out of the box and type it into my thing, so you know that I did not pick this for you randomly, on purpose. Today's question is, which fictional character do you wish you could meet?
That's a good question. I don't know, the top of my head, I want to be as true as possible to this by basically just picking whatever comes to the top of my head. So fictional character would probably be Dracula. I think it would be just really interesting. So on the side, it would be lovely to get a full paid. I just watched Nosferatu, so there's that piece. But getting invited to a lovely European countryside, to a castle, to go meet with somebody for maybe an interview or for, therapy or something, and then I don't know what happens afterwards. Could be good, could be bad, but it would be just very interesting at least.
Yeah. All I can think about is like the amount of story that Dracula comes up with, right? Like the length of that life or undead life and all of the different people that they have ever met, all the different experiences that they've had. Like I would totally be into wanting to know what keeps him up at night.
Yes.
Like what are the things that are problematic for him? Like what are the areas that get him kind of antsy? That would be so interesting.
You know where this comes from is, and I'm not plugging it because I don't have any stake in it, no pun intended. But there's actually a game out there called, I think it's called like Therapist Vampire or Vampire Therapist. And you, as a vampire, therapize other vampires to help them continue. Yeah. So it's like I guess it's maybe a story game, or I saw it on TikTok or wherever. But it's that idea that like you're a therapist and you're working with other vampires to kind of help them through their unlife and the long life. And yeah, so I think that's why it came to my mind, actually. So.
That is kind of the coolest thing. Like I'm stupidly excited about that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I'm gonna have to look that up. Interesting. Well, speaking of nerdy things and gaming things, like let's talk about how we use this in therapy. I am so excited to talk about this. I always just describe myself as kind of as a nerd light. I like a lot of nerdy things, and when I get into things, I'm into them. But I never like cross the threshold into like cosplay or into the things that like when people get into geek world, like that's what they think of. Like I'm never quite at the cusp of that. So I always feel like I don't quite belong in the cosplay world, but I'm probably a little more geeky and nerdy than people who aren't into those things. Like Firefly is a huge component of my husband and Maya's world. I watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer like annually, like the whole series. There are some very geeky, nerdy things that I'm into. My husband and I play D&D with several groups of friends. Nice. I DM all of those, so it's super fun for me to like think through and create these little worlds and these stories. So I am a nerd and I love it. And I always feel like a little bit of imposter syndrome when I talk to other nerds who are like deeper into the world than I am. And I feel like, especially as I start diving more into how do we use this in therapy and how do we make this a more connectable component and build a community around this. I'm always just in awe of people who are doing that work, who are training that work. And so I don't even know where to start with a question for you of like, how did you get into this? Or, tell me your story.
Yeah. So I think, at some point in people's lives, they're doing psychotherapy in some way, or they're practicing and such. And then, you know, my story kind of started with a conversation with Jack Birkenstock Jr., who's the executive director of the Bodhana Group. And he is such a wonderful guy. He will talk to you for hours and hours and hours about this passion project. But it's always this idea of like, whoa, what if I combine psychotherapy with something I like, or something that engages people? And so a lot of times I was just thinking, instead of a couples group, why not run a couples cooking group? And so you have your starting piece, and then they cook a meal together and they follow instructions, and then maybe you're talking about a topic while it's happening, and then at the end they have to eat no matter what they made. If they burn it or something else, it's a learning
Yeah.
lesson. But it's that idea of really increasing engagement
Mm-hmm.
while delivering psychotherapy or working through those types of pieces. So some terms that I have to kind of explain a little bit, which will be helpful, is so I would say, and again, I'm not the official piece, but gaming with intent is just that idea of selecting games on purpose, board games, role playing games,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, with an intent to teach a skill or to
Yep.
use in practice in some way. So I work at a children's hospital right now, and so we're looking at picking certain games that might help with the behavioral components. So social games, or picking games that work on mathematics or something else. So it's really gaming with intent.
Yeah.
Um, and that kind of leads into therapy blended tabletop role playing games, where the two things we kind of designate are therapeutic gaming, which is it's therapeutic to game. So it's therapeutic to sit around a table,
Yes.
play Dungeons and Dragons, play a board game, you play Monopoly, you learn about money, you learn about harassing your friends for property, stuff like that, So it's therapeutic to play it. But therapy blended is much more of an intentional aspect. So everything from the game you pick to the people you're working with to the story you make is all having your
Yeah.
type of therapy blended into it, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I I love that you talked about the idea of doing these things in actionable ways, right? So my husband and I joked a long time ago. My husband and I have worked together since we met. So we worked at a group home together for many years, and then now he works in my company. And people always ask us like, how do you do this? How do you do this well? Because like you're still married and you like each other and you spend like literally all the time together. This seems odd, but I think it is that active participation in the things that we're doing. And we joked for a while about like we should hold couples work weekends or retreats or things where we just make couples move furniture together, because the art of how do I communicate which corner I'm doing, the frustration tolerance that you build, the reconciliation after there being some miscommunication. There's so many parts to like putting together furniture or moving furniture or like doing those things that is really helpful in understanding how a couple can function and what roles they play in each of those. When somebody gets frustrated, how do we reconcile? All of those pieces are just wonderful. And you can do the same thing with games, right? Whether it's a competitive game or a collaborative game, seeing how everybody functions within it, what roles they take and what things that they can do, really just help understand like the behavioral components of how the relationship is working and each individual person in there. I talk about that with my students a lot, of when we're trying to build rapport with teens. Like playing Uno is not just a game when you're building rapport with teens. Like we are talking frustration tolerance, we're talking empathy building, we're talking like all sorts of different nuances in here. And sometimes Uno is not the right game to build this relationship. You really do have to try and figure out what's going to get us connected? What's the purpose here? Because the game itself is a tool toward, not a like function all in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when you say Uno, I'm thinking of like the 4+ card and
Yeah.
then seeing someone's reaction and such, right? And that would be therapeutic gaming. That would be, the game itself is not being altered too much, and you're picking a game with intent to kind of teach a skill or to move through those pieces. With the therapy blended TTRPG, I'm glad that you already know about Dungeons and Dragons and other types of role playing games like that. I love the fact that there's a role playing game for anything you want in the world. There is a Buffy game out there. There is a Grey's Anatomy role playing game out there. There is all sorts of stuff out there already. So we don't have to always rely on Dungeons and Dragons, which is more of a combat simulator with some role play added to it, right? So, but how I kind of lay it out is with the therapy blended piece is it's like making a sandwich. So the bread itself is the I don't know if I want to go that way, but the bread is basically like the game you're picking. So is this game, reward people for working together or not? Does the
Mm-hmm.
game have mechanics that are helpful for the issues you want to work on? We picked kids on bikes for the study I had done because when you fail at a role, you get a token that you can use to help your friends.
Cute.
Yeah, so things like that. So you pick a game that kind of works for the as a bread piece, and then the meat is the clients that you want to serve or the people you want to work with. So for us, for the study, we picked socially anxious individuals. So we did the spin 17 to kind of identify if they had any social anxiety, and then kind of what level they were at. And we were running the whole thing basically as much as you would run a social group or like a social anxiety treatment group. So we're not trying to replace individual therapy. We're not
Mm-hmm.
trying to replace anything else, but just running it as a group. And then the cheese of that sandwich would be the modality. So you're looking at, for me, it was cognitive behavioral therapy, but you can do IFS, you can do DBT, you can do whatever sort of thing. So it's really, really tailored to what your expertise is in gaming, but then also expertise in delivery of therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think in looking at some of the Dungeons and Dragon style games that I have run at my practice, I run them very differently than my game master runs them now because my game master does not have as much of a behavioral background as I do. So I geared a lot of my things towards some of these behavioral components in trying to strive to get people to think about things differently or address a feeling or do an action, whereas she is so much more existential than I am. So her method, I mean, to me watching the video of it, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I would die in this game. Like this is so not my jam. But her method with her people is phenomenal in seeing the growth and change. So it's just this really cool opportunity to see how, yeah, that methodology, the tool that you pick, that cheese that you're building in your sandwich makes such a huge difference. Cheddar versus Gouda is a totally different sandwich, right?
Yeah, and it really impacts like when providing feedback or clinical consultation or clinical supervision for this piece. Um, a lot of the questions that we receive are when you boil it down, it's just maybe you need to dig more into the modality you're using. Like maybe you need to be a little bit more, um, you know, well versed in whatever you're doing, for example, right? And so, or the question is more about, well, how do I get players to do blah blah blah? And it's like, well, that's a game master thing, but also running a group thing, right? So the answers are kind of there. Like the biggest, and I don't want to cheat by saying takeaway for today, but I mean one of the biggest takeaways is therapy first.
Yeah.
A lot of people, when they see this and they hear this, like, Jack will always say from the Bodhana group, he'll say, people contact him all the time and they'll say, well, I'm a therapist and I heard about Pokemon or I heard about Dungeons and Dragons and I want to run games. And so his advice is usually, well, like, play the game with your friends and really learn how to play the game because it's so important to be equally balanced in both. And sometimes he'll get people who are dungeon masters who want to start adding in therapeutic elements, and he's like, you need to be well versed in that too. You shouldn't just sit your friends
Mhm.
down and start therapizing them during the middle of your session, unless you're playing like Call of Cthulhu where you're trying to mess with their minds anyways. But it's just that idea of you have to be really well versed in both. But one of the things that I shout from the rooftops is therapy first.
Yeah.
Because if we're on any geek therapy, Facebook groups or anything else, or people are asking questions, they're usually like, well, how do I use Pokemon to treat, a oppositional defiant disorder or this or that? And it's like,
Right.
just do the therapy.
Yeah.
Because sometimes what we do is we get really, really, really concentrated in, I love Pokemon and you love Pokemon. Let's talk about it. But
Yeah.
therapy first, therapy first, therapy first.
Yeah. That therapy first component, I think, is wildly important when, especially when we're talking about the supervision aspect of what we're talking about here, right? Like when I get students who come to me and are like, I want to come here because you play D&D with people. I want to come here because you are a nerd and you get me. And I'm like, great, that's awesome. And like, let's talk about what we're going to learn as you being a future therapist, because that's the end goal. I tend to look at my supervisees and think that my job is to expose them to a lot of things so that they can find out who they are as a therapist and go into the world much more prepared to be that person in the world. Because I don't need 20 more Taras. I need everybody to be their own individual self to meet the clients where they are in the best way that they can. So I don't need 20 more people doing what I do, but I do need to expose you to lots of different layers of things. So I might look at you and say, hey, I really want you to look at this person through an ACT lens. And I want you to spend the next 6 weeks really using ACT to help navigate these pieces. Even if ACT isn't your normal jam, I want you to try it because these skills are effective and these tools are effective. And let's see how it impacts your client's life in these ways, even if that's not your total thing. I joke all the time that I know that I'm a behaviorist at my core. And do I know how to do existential therapy or psychoanalytic therapy? Absolutely. Like I can do some work in those camps if needed, because that's the therapeutic component that's needed for that client in that moment. But at my core, like I'd like to stay over here in my little behavioral world if I could. And I use all sorts of tools across the board. And I speak a lot to my students about it's important to have a good tool bag, and role playing games and being really intentional about the gaming that you're choosing can be a tool in that tool bag. That's not the that's not your therapeutic orientation as a therapist. Like that's just one of your tools in your tool bag if that's also a thing that you love.
Yeah, and I think, to add on to that, one of the things that we kind of tote for the therapy blended is having a two-person model.
Mhm.
So either two therapists or one therapist and a therapeutic, GM sort of thing,
Mhm.
where you have one person kind of building up the game and running it, and the others kind of, I guess for Zoom, it's a lot easier. You can check in with people. You can see their cameras. You can see if they're tuning out or not or doing something else. But even in person, that person can kind of hover around and engage with people individually, or they can write the notes the whole time. So the other person can just concentrate on running the game.
Right?
And also that person can, brainstorm with the other person about, different story beats as you go forward. So when I talk about therapy blended, I mean everything from session zero to character creation to we talk about in the trainings, spotlight moments where, okay, well, each person at the table gets 2 or 3 episodes of spotlight where they're going to be the
Mhm.
primary, and then they have maybe 2 in the middle and then 2 in the end, where they're not as big of a focus. And the
Yeah.
other aspect we look at is, so we're trying to like put in that therapeutic piece at all times, everything from the check-in to the gameplay to the checkout to the character creation, as I said before, the story beats, and then the two people at the before the session can talk a little bit about like, okay, what are we going to do for this session? What they so for example, there's like a story during the study where I was like, I want to kill this character, and like non-player character, and then Jack's like, well, why? And I was like, well, I think it'd make a really good story. And he's like, well, how do you think that would affect the people? I'm like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, maybe that wouldn't be so great.
Yeah.
So I take off, and I know you talk about hats, geeking out again. You take off your GM cap and you put on your therapist cap, and you're like, okay,
Yeah.
what's the therapeutic value of moving through this? Because at the end of the day, you know, you're looking for planned out pieces, but being flexible enough to allow people to bring things to the table. So if they come to me and say somebody's like, well, I really want to talk to my dad about this. Yes. Okay. yeah, sure, let's facilitate that. Let's have a talk with your dad. And I know from the intake that they, troubles with dad and this, and they want to role play that out. And okay, great. And so it's almost like you're half waiting for the aha moments in session, but then also, you have some stuff planned if things aren't going in a certain direction. So it's
Yeah.
being open to both and that flexibility, and then just kind of reminding yourself that this is therapy because I am therapizing. I am doing this piece. I'm being intentional. I am enjoying myself a lot.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
also, like, the debrief will tell you, and the screeners and stuff you can do after sessions and stuff can tell you where things are going. And anyways, yeah.
Yeah. I think that factor is the art of of balancing this work, right? Because it is something that you enjoy, or else we wouldn't be doing it. Um, and we have to find that space of making it not about us. And I think that especially for our supervisees, that is a space where we find ourselves all the time. I think there's an Instagram that I follow sometimes that's most of the time I really love, and then every once in a while I cringe at some of the things that they say, because it is for us and they are true things, and I just cringe a little bit on things like when people are very much into the Me Too kind of communication to a client, right? Like a client says like, this is what's going on in the world, and they come back with like, me too, girl, me too. And I'm like, I cringe a little bit, like, oh, what's the benefit here? What is that communicating to your client? Is that a space of self-disclosure that is good, that is building rapport, that is connecting in some way, that is of benefit to the client? Or is that just you just being you in that session, which, there, I don't know, there's times for it. And when you said that about killing off a character because it would be really good for the story, like that's that moment of self-disclosure of like, I'm having fun, this is about me, I want this to go somewhere. That your mentor looked at you and said, well, but what is that doing therapeutically? And you're like, oh yeah, this is my job, that I'm like, I have to do this other piece, right? These people aren't our friends that we're doing therapy with. These people are clients that we have to have our therapeutic hat on. And we may enjoy the process. There are some clients that I adore, and I'm not going to meet them at a pub after work because I can't. Like, you're not my friend, actually. Like, this is a one-sided ish relationship that I show up very professionally for, I show up very authentically for, but it has its limits in that space. And I think that adding this layer of the gaming component, something that you're into that space, like adds that extra layer. It's really interesting to have to talk to our supervisees about and have to make sure they're really competent of.
Yeah, I love that this is going in the use of self kind of moment, and that kind of piece, because I think, yeah, it's something you're really enjoying is playing the game, and it's engaging you. And that's the purpose of doing this game rather than just a social anxiety group. I'm running a game social anxiety group because I want to engage the players, and it's engaging me too, and it's sucking me into it. So it's like, oh, well, that's not great. I got to keep my boundaries even more than everyone else. And I think that use of self is so helpful because I've only been doing my stuff for maybe 15 years. And I remember at the start in school and in other places, like, you never tell anyone any of your preference. You can't, like, I used to take off my wedding ring a long time ago when I worked at,
Mhm.
like, with street involved people, because they'd say, oh, you're married. And I was like, I don't even discuss this. But it's that idea that, like, you know, here's something that you actually love in your life, whether it be Pokemon or role playing or whatever, and you're sharing it with somebody to kind of build that engagement. But is this for you or is this for them?
Mhm.
Right. And so I think that's where, for myself, over the years, it's been building up those boundaries. If I want to really talk about, I don't know, if I really want to talk about the latest horror film or something with somebody, maybe my boundaries are slipping with this person. Maybe I'm enjoying the session, but am I enjoying it am I keeping it on track for like how many sessions I'm doing for whatever I'm doing, say a protocol or something else?
Mhm.
Or, you know, is this a one-off, I was going to say laissez-faire, but it's a French thing. But is this a one-off sort of, like, this session's a little silly, or they need time to just decompress, or they need validation? Is that okay? But it's always kind of keeping in mind that just because you share a hobby with somebody doesn't mean, like, you really have to keep even better boundaries
Yeah.
of are we talking about the latest Magic the Gathering cards because we both love the set, or is there a metaphor here I can use, or is there something else I'm building towards as part of the structure?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I kind of want to transition into one of the other topics that you mentioned of using movies and TV shows and things for exposure therapies. I do work a lot with some OCD clients, and I do work a lot with folks with anxiety and all sorts of pieces. And I just feel like this is going to be a really interesting and fun area. I would love to just hear how you frame that and like how that works for you.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just start maybe with more of the cognitive behavioral therapy exposure piece, and then there's a little bit more of a specialty with the OCD treatment. But with the exposure piece, there's just so much. Sometimes people don't want to go out and do things. Sometimes people don't want to go walk around the hospital where they had that traumatic event and they don't want to go out, especially in Canada, it's cold. So they don't want to go out and walk that piece. So there's these intermittent pieces you can do in between where maybe you could watch Grey's Anatomy or maybe
Mm-hmm.
watch procedural medical shows and kind of build your way up to it. So when we're making the SUDs, the subjective units of distress, it's that idea of like, well, where would this particular episode land on out of 100, and then
Yeah.
maybe picking a random episode where we both don't know what's going to happen in this procedural piece, right? And so it's like the more you get to know the media, I'll just start with movies and TV. The more you get to know the media, the more you can kind of build up this toolkit of things that may catalyze individuals,
Mm-hmm.
things
Mm-hmm.
that might be great to sit through that cause a lot of distress. And as I always say, the fire alarm is going off, but it doesn't mean there's a fire. And so we want to purposely ring that bell sometimes. And so a good example is when working with car accidents. Like, let's watch NASCAR. Let's build to watching NASCAR. But we're sitting in that office and the cars are so close to each other and they're so unpredictable, and I don't know if there's going to be a crash during this race or not. And I just think there's so many ways to go at it with media, where my favorite part is not only what you're doing in the session, but it's the homework piece. Now I want
Mm-hmm.
you to go watch 10 episodes of this. Now I want you to rewatch this movie at nauseum until you don't have activation, until you're bored, which I often explain is like the opposite of activation.
Yeah.
And so let's do this ad nauseum until it's a zero. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Absolutely. And I think one of the interesting pieces about this, in context with supervision is that this isn't something that I think a lot of schools, talk about as an intervention that can be used, right? I was just recently talking to one of my supervisees about building rapport with a teen, and I said, well, hey, my husband's got a couple of extra game consoles. I can bring them into the office if your kid is into gaming. And he looked at me, he's like, are you telling me that you want me to play like Nintendo with my kid? And I was like, if that's going to help, sure. Like, I mean, I don't know what your kid's into. What's your kid into? Let's find some stuff that like could get you into building that relationship. And he said, I don't think they covered, Super Mario in grad school. And I'm like, heard. And you can totally do this because this is a thing, not just from a geek therapy standpoint, but just from a building communication piece. And I use a lot of videos within my sessions with people. I have my iPad in my sessions, and I have a lot of videos just like earmarked of things that I think are really important. One of my favorite scenes, it's not an exposure, but one of my favorite scenes to show people if they haven't seen Inside Out is the scene with Sadness and Bing Bong. I definitely have that clip just like ready and available at all times to be like, let's talk about what it means to sit with a feeling for a minute and what it looks like different from when joy is trying to do this and then sadness does this. Like, how does this look different? How do we know what's happening here? And I love discussing those pieces. But the aspect of exposure work in that, of being like, not having to go all the way to like we're walking down to the parking lot and getting in your car and doing this thing and seeing what happens, to the space of like we're going to watch these things, and we're going to watch things that we don't know what's going to happen, that neither of us know what's going to happen in this, that unknown component, and teaching our students to be able to think through even their own anxiety about like, but what if something doesn't happen in here and the intervention that I'm using, it fails in this moment, right? And having to problem solve with them how they're feeling about it not turning out the way that they wanted it to in that moment with that client. It's just it's like a really cool parallel process for what we're teaching a student to do in the art of utilizing media in these exposure kind of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what comes to my mind when talking about these types of things is I, as personally, love horror as a genre. And I find when I'm working with individuals where the primary piece we're working on is generalized anxiety and worry, from the CBT protocol kind of stance, it's like I can't watch horror films because if I watch a horror film, then I'm going to think that could happen to me. And I
Yeah.
always joke with people like, so you think the killer is outside your window right now? You watch the film and then you make eye contact and they go, that's what's happening to you tonight, buddy. Like, thank God, thank God that you watch this, so we know where our roles are going to be. But it's just that idea of, well, if I don't encounter it, then I won't think about it.
Yeah.
And so that's why I find sometimes horror films can be really, really good at really like exposing yourself to something that makes you uncomfortable, but then also like you were just as at risk before as you were after the film. The knowledge actually might even help you survive one, which I guess is like the whole premise of the Scream series.
Sure.
But it's that idea of like this will, I can't watch this because then I'll think about it. And it's like, well, let's test that. Let's work through it. And the other thing that comes to my mind is Disney's done such a great job, not a plug for Disney, but it does such a great job of intergenerational trauma as the villain in a movie, right? Like Turning Red and Encanto, where there's a lot of clients when I meet with them, I'm like, you know what? I hear a lot of perfectionism. I hear a lot of like, if I, there's a line very specifically that's, if I can't be a purpose, I'm worthless unless I can be a purpose. Right.
Mhm.
And so it's like, well, why don't we just watch this film? And so, the homework's to go watch the film. They come back, I bawled, I bawled, I bawled. Great. Write
Yes.
down when, where, watch it again and again and again. And it's a little bit of an emotion focused piece, but it's that idea of, I want you to engage with the media, and every time you see it, it's going to dig a little deeper for you. It's
Yeah.
going to, what are you noticing about the characters' interactions? What are you noticing about the scene? What makes you really sad about this person or what they're going through? And every time you watch it, you're going to pick up something new, and you can write it down a little bit and kind of, engage with it. So, anyways, I think that's just an interesting piece of intergenerational trauma being the villain of most of those films, right? So.
Yeah. I think I read an article at one point that was talking about how, watching Disney through the years and how different generations of people have really like turned Disney in different ways, and this next generation of people who have had therapy kind of available to them for such a long time are now becoming the creators and the storytellers inside of Disney who are saying things like, it's totally fine for a kid to have two parents and be experiencing some sort of traumatic thing. Like, we don't need to kill off a parent for there to be a for there to be a problem in this person's life, or for them to wish for something different, or for somebody to experience individuation, or for, somebody to go through these areas of growth. And I specifically loved Encanto with their story of the intergenerational living, right? Of like all of these people living within the same home, and which is so common in a lot of other cultures and a lot of other countries. And I think that was one of the first places where I really was able to recognize, like, we're finally seeing something that's not so centralized into like this very North American white perspective of what should happen in our families and in our dynamics. And yeah, I love what they're doing, and I hope that, we just keep growing with our own knowledge in those spaces. And from that avenue, I keep thinking about, like, how can I help my supervisees to identify the things that would be helpful in how they're bringing that into therapy. Do you have any thoughts on like homework you would give a supervisee to like start creating their own little like bag of tricks when it comes to using media or gaming?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind in a less structured way is just, maybe this isn't for everybody, but it's just that idea of like the more that we engage in psychotherapy, the more we're there for people, the more we're kind of interacting with people. When we start, we use a lot of like, what would I do in this person's situation? And then as we kind of grow as clinicians, as we meet more and more people, we kind of evaluate, is this is the person what the person presenting congruent with what they feel, what they believe, what they're doing. I always kind of say that there's what a person does, what they think they're doing, and what they say they're doing,
Yeah.
and it's that piece of, at first we're kind of putting ourselves in that person's place, to assess mental health, to assess, like, is this congruent, is there something I'm missing, that kind of piece, because no one comes to a session and just tells you every single thing from an abstract way, right? So
Right.
what I'm getting at, I guess, is sometimes in order to kind of find media or find a game or find something that really speaks to your clients, maybe something that speaks to you. So I always, I always recommend, if you haven't been in therapy, go to therapy. Everyone survives their childhood in some way. And so, but when you're in therapy, you start to learn your own catalysts, your own pieces, the things that you tend to fall upon or to avoid. And if you're really working with a modality, the best way to kind of keep, I mean, you're teaching it all day, so you integrate into who you are. And I think we were
Yeah.
talking about that previously, just about the behavioral piece. And so you can really learn by going to therapy some of the things that catalyze you, or some of the sensitive spots that you have. And then you can practice a bit by finding media or games or things that speak to you, make you sad, make you happy, make you wish for different. And then that you can then use. And if you feel something different, because I think we resonate sometimes with clients too. Oh, that feels a little bit like me. Oh, I
Yeah.
feel like I've been through that before. And so that kind of, then that openness, and, okay, set your boundary. Not me too.
Yeah.
Right. But it's that piece of, like, okay, so maybe I'm having an inkling that maybe Encanto would be great for this, for perfectionism,
Mm-hmm.
or for, I have to do something in order to be worth it, like it's I guess that is like one of the things I kind of recommend is, you know, using yourself a bit, and for people who are starting out. And then the secondary piece is really trying to find what you're trying to catalyze, or find that core piece that the person is trying to avoid. Because sometimes some people will say, well, I can't go to a Walmart. Well, why not? Well, like, let's walk through it. Is it the drive there? Is it getting out of the car? Is it the thoughts about how many people will be there? Is it being stuck in there? Panic, or this or that. And
Mm-hmm.
when you break those down, you get those little pieces of, like, it's a crowd of people. Okay, well, let's play crowd of people simulator. Or let's, I don't jump into it. I would love to. But the VR space is really getting more and more where you can do roller coasters for panic, or you can, or for
Mm-hmm.
health anxiety. And so it's just that idea of really narrowing down what part of this is the ick. And then let's think of a media, or think of something, or even from the client's perspective, what movies can you not stand, and why?
Mm-hmm.
And what things really cause you to turn them off or not play or whatever. And they're kind of going to be the best leader for, you know like when I start with people, I'm like, if you tell me you don't like going to Walmart, at some point maybe we'll go to Walmart.
Yeah.
Because we both can objectively say it's not that risky, but it feels very, very risky, right? Those alarm
Yeah.
bells are going off. So people, almost have a dowsing rod for where they don't want to go to. And that can help you then maybe bring in some media that comes to their mind or your mind that will simulate that a bit.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that the one of the pieces that I'm really connecting to is that everybody's going to have different components that create meaning for them, or that they connect to in that way. I have one student right now who, when we were talking kind of movies and things for a little bit, and I think I mentioned Encanto, and I mentioned Inside Out, and I mentioned a couple of other movies, and they were like, so I really just don't watch cartoons. It's not like I can't watch cartoons. I just like don't. That's just not the genre of things that I like spend time watching. And I looked at her and I had this like thought of like, but how can you not? These are like the most therapeutic, like amazing things. And then I thought to myself, oh, I love cartoons. Cartoons are a big part of my experience. Like if I get rid of all of the other streaming services, pretty sure I'm keeping Disney Plus. Like, like I don't know that I care about anything else except for maybe cartoons. And I was like, oh, okay, so now I have to like think about what are other ones, right? What are other movies that also have some of these messages and also have these things, because your affinity does not match my affinity. I watch these not because I have a bunch of kids or have a bunch of teens. I just like them, and this is my grouping of things that I enjoy. So what are the things that you enjoy? And then we can kind of build from there, because not everybody has to be into doing things with VR or playing games or doing these pieces, and they can find whatever works with their clients from their own spaces. And I think I conveniently forget that because I just like all my stuff. My stuff's fun and
Absolutely
entertaining.
right. I think I notice that the most when I'm like, oh, there's this really cool anime that has this very intricate story and it's very heartwarming with this, and the person just glazes over. Like they're like, it's a lot of flashes and bangs and a lot of streaks of color, and I don't, it doesn't speak to me, you know.
Totally.
And I think, you know, we have our affinities, but we can also dip our toes into what I would recommend is the best of. Like,
Yeah.
you know, if you don't like anime, there's probably 5 movies or 5 shows that if you want to dip your toe into it a little bit, you know, you'll see the peak of what that will bring, right? Like, I'm
Yeah.
not a big Star Trek fan, but I've watched it all. So if somebody brings things up, I can start talking about metaphors. I can start to
Yep.
bring things into play. And really, you don't need to be the expert on these pieces. It's just almost like a little bit of a connection. So if I know
Yeah.
somebody is really into Star Trek, I can be like, oh, this feels like kind of like the Vulcan edict a bit. Like, is it true or not? And they're like, oh yeah, hey, yeah, that's true. And then and then the Romulans, and I'm like, and I'm glazed over. But for them, they're like, oh yes, like you brought a little inkling in, and I'm going to
Yeah.
explain to you. And then yeah, that makes sense with this. Or they'll come back after a session or two and go, you know, I was really thinking about the Vulcan edict with this, and you know how these are the problems that happen because they follow this, and this is the problems with this, and it's like, because sometimes you're
Yep.
just planting the seeds, and you know, but it's again, I want to go back to that. It's all about the therapy piece
Yep.
because you know, I didn't memorize all the Pokemon, but I understand enough of it to talk about it. But it doesn't mean also like sometimes I've seen other maybe, and it makes me a little bit more sense with play therapists, like floor time therapists,
Mm-hmm.
or occupational therapists. They'll make a Minecraft server and invite their clients, and then they have to go through all of the confidentiality and all the pieces of, you know, meeting with people online and that kind of piece. At the end of the day, though, you know, it's really about what's going to be most impactful for that therapy process. And coming back to the tenets of cognitive behavioral therapy for me, anyways, which is like, what's your structure for your 10 sessions, your 5 sessions, your 15 sessions, your what kind of flavor of anxiety are you sensing, and then doing it based off that, and whatever you're going to practice, you know, and having your plan and adding to the plan rather than the plan is we're going to play Pokemon until
Yeah.
we get to somewhere, you know.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Ugh. I could nerd out with you all day. And unfortunately, we do not have all day to do this. So I am going to absolutely invite you to come back at some point if you would like, because I feel like we could go so much deeper into some of these areas and keep, you know, keep that connection of how we help people grow into these areas, right? Because I think that the more we teach our students and supervisees to connect at a way that makes sense for the client, that enhances the therapeutic ability through some of these means that don't get taught in school. Although, I mean, gosh, in 10 years, I could totally see a grad school class on, you know, therapeutic gaming and how you integrate these things well. I hope there is. Whoever's out there developing courses, please listen to this
Oh, there
podcast
are some
and
courses out there right
do it.
now in Sweden, I
Yeah.
think.
Oh, in Sweden. Amazing. Yeah. So yeah, I think it could be in the future, but I think that right now we're doing the work of understanding how do we do this well, and I want to talk more about it. Do you have things that you want to make sure that you let people know about? I'm of course going to put your uh all your websites and things on the show notes, but are there other things you want to make sure people know about or want to find out about?
I'd say just check out the Bodana group in York, Pennsylvania. They're doing really good work. Again, just kind of doing trainings. We finished a research project, which was therapy, therapy, therapy. We used therapy screeners. We kept it as therapeutic as possible. You know, they provide education. They just kickstarted a new role playing game, basically, that's supposed to be very much focused on therapy and allowing in those processes by using your emotions and such to kind of guide the
Very cool.
story. That's really about it, I'd say. Yeah.
Very cool. I will put the links to that as well. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really enjoyed our time together.
Same here. Thank you very much.
This has been Supervision Smörgåsbord with Dr. Tara Sanderson. Please like and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. You can find us at drtarasanderson.com/podcast and on all social media at Dr. Tara Sanderson. Thank you, and we will see you next time.